The Tiger of Mysore by G.A. Henty. Chapter 4. First Impressions. The next morning Dick was up early, eager to investigate the palace, of which he had seen little the night before. The house was large and handsome, the Rajah having added to it gradually every year. On passing the doors, the great hall was at once entered. Its roof, of elaborately carved stones, was supported by 2 rows of pillars with sculptured capitals. The floor was made of inlaid marble, and at one end was raised a foot above the general level. Here stood a stone chair, on which the Rajah sat when he adjudicated upon disputes among his people, heard petitions, and gave audiences, while a massive door on the left-hand side gave entrance to the private apartments. These were all small in comparison with the entrance hall. The walls were lined with marble slabs, richly carved, and were dimly lighted by windows generally high up in the walls, which were of great thickness. The marble floors were covered with thick rugs, and each room had its divan with soft cushions and rich shawls and covers. The room in which they had supped the night before was the only exception. This had been specially furnished and decorated in English fashion. The windows here were low and afforded a view over the garden. Next to it were several apartments, all fitted with divans, but with low windows and a bright outlook. They could be darkened during the heat of the day by shutters. With the exception of these windows, the others throughout the house contained no glass, the light entering through innumerable holes that formed a filigree work in the thin slabs of stone that filled the orifices. The grounds round the palace were thickly planted with trees, which constituted a grove rather than a garden according to Dick's English notions. This was indeed the great object of the planter, and numerous fountains added to the effect of the overhanging foliage. Dick wandered about, delighted. Early as it was, men with water skins were at work among the clumps of flowers and shrubs that covered the grounds, wherever there was a break among the trees. Here and there were small pavilions, whose roofs of sculptured stone were supported by shafts of marble. The foliage of shrubs and trees alike was new to Dick, and the whole scene delighted him. Half an hour later his 2 cousins joined him. "We wondered what had become of you," Dost said, "and should not have found you if Raj Bullob had not told us that he saw you come out here. Come in now. Coffee is ready. We always have coffee the first thing, except in very hot weather, when we have fruit sherbet. After that we ride or shoot till the sun gets hot, and then come in to the morning meal at 10. On going in, Dick found that his mother and the Ranee were both up, and they all sat down to what Dick considered a breakfast, consisting of coffee and a variety of fruit and bread. 1 or 2 dishes of meat were also handed round, but were taken away untouched. "Now come out to the stables, Dick," the Rajah said. "Anwar, the officer who commanded the escort, will meet us there. He will be your instructor." The stables were large. The horses were fastened to rings along each side, and were not, as in England, separated from each other by stalls. A small stone trough with running water was fixed against each wall at a convenient height, and beneath this was a pile of fodder before each horse. "This is the one that I have chosen for you," the Rajah said, stopping before a pretty creature that possessed a considerable proportion of Arab blood, as was shown by its small head. "It is very gentle and well trained, and is very fast. When you have got perfectly at ease upon it, you shall have something more difficult to sit, until you are able to ride any horse in the stable barebacked. Murad is to be your own property, as long as you are out here." Asais led the horse out. It was bridled but unsaddled, and Anwar gave a few instructions to Dick, and then said, "I will help you up, but in a short time you will learn to vault on to his back, without any assistance. See, you gather your reins so, in your left hand, place your right hand on its shoulder, and then spring up." "I can do that now," Dick laughed, and placed his hand on the horse's shoulder. He lightly vaulted into his seat. "Well done, Dick," the Rajah said, while the 2 boys, who had been looking on with amused faces, clapped their hands. "Now, Sahib," Anwar went on, "you must let your legs hang easily. Press with your knees, and let your body sway slightly with the movement of the horse. Balance yourself rather than try to hold on." "I understand," Dick said. "It's just as you do on board ship, when she is rolling a bit. Let go the reins." For half an hour the horse proceeded at a walk along the road that wound in and out through the park-like grounds. "I begin to feel quite at home," Dick said at the end of that time. "I should like to go a bit faster now. It's no odds if I do tumble off." "Shake your rein a little, the horse will understand it," Anwar said. Dick did so, and Murad at once started at a gentle canter. Easy as it was, Dick thought several times that he would be off. However, he gripped as tightly as he could with his knees, and as he became accustomed to the motion, and learned to give to it, acquired ease and confidence. He was not, however, sorry when, at the end of another half hour, Anwar held up his hand as he approached him, and the horse stopped at the slightest touch of the rein. As Dick slid off, his legs felt as if they did not belong to him, and his back ached so that he could scarcely straighten it. The Rajah and his sons had returned to the palace, and the boys were there waiting for him. "You have done very well, cousin," Doast said with grave approval. "You will not be long before you can ride as well as we can. Now you had better go up at once and have a bath and put on fresh clothes." Dick felt that the advice was good, as, bathed in perspiration and stiff and sore in every limb, he slowly made his way to his room. For the next month he spent the greater part of his time on horseback. For the first week he rode only in the grounds of the palace. Then he ventured beyond, accompanied by Anwar on horseback, when his two cousins joined the party, and by the end of the month he was perfectly at home on Murad's back. So far he had not begun to practice shooting. "It would be of no use," the Rajah said when he one day spoke of it. "You want your nerves in good order for that, and it requires an old horseman to have his hand steady enough for shooting straight after a hard ride. Your rides are not severe for a horseman, but they are trying for you. Leave the shooting alone, lad. There is no hurry for that." By this time the Rajah had become convinced that it was useless to try and dissuade either his sister or Dick from attempting the enterprise for which they had come over. Possibly the earnest conviction of the former, that her husband was still alive, influenced him to some extent, and the strength and activity of Dick showed him that he was able to play the part of a man. The Rajah said little, but watched the boy closely, made him go through trials of strength with some of his troopers, and saw him practice with blunted swords with others. Dick did well in both trials, and the Rajah then requested Anwar, who was celebrated for his skill with the tulwar, to give him daily half an hour's sword play, after his riding lesson. He himself undertook to teach him to use the rifle and pistol. Dick threw himself into his work with great ardour, and in a very short time could sit any horse in the stable, and came to use a rifle and pistol with an amount of accuracy that surprised his young cousins. "The boy is getting on wonderfully well," the Rajah said one day to his sister. "His exercises have given him so much nerve, and so steady a hand, that he already shoots very fairly. I should expect him to grow up into a fine young man, Margaret, were it not that I have the gravest fears as to this mad enterprise, which I cannot help telling you, both for your good and his, is, in my opinion, absolutely hopeless." "I know, Mortiz," she said, "that you think it is folly on my part to cling to hope, and while I do not disguise from myself that there would seem but little chance that my husband has survived, and that I can give no reason for my faith in his still being alive, and my confidence that he will be restored to me some day, I have so firm a conviction that nothing will shake it. Why should I have such a confidence if it were not well founded? In my dreams I always see him alive, and I believe firmly that I dream of him so often because he is thinking of me. When he was at sea, several times I felt disturbed and anxious, though without any reason for doing so, and each time on his return I found, when we compared dates, that his ship was battling with a tempest at the time. I was so troubled with him. I remembered that the first time this happened he laughed at me, but when, upon 2 other occasions, it turned out so, he said, 'There are things we do not understand, Margaret. You know that. In Scotland there are many who believe in second sight, as it's called, and that there are families there, and they say in Ireland also, where a sort of warning is given of the death of a member of the family. We sailors are a superstitious people, and believe in things that landsmen laugh at. It does not seem to me impossible that when 2 people love each other dearly as we do, one may feel when the other is in danger, or may be conscious of his death. It may be said that such things seldom happen, but that is no proof that they never do so, for some people may be more sensitive to such feelings or impressions than others, and you may be one of them. There is one thing, Margaret, the fact that you have somehow felt when I was in trouble should cheer you when I am away, for if mere danger should so affect you, surely you will know should death befall me, and as long as you do not feel that, you may be sure that I shall return safe and sound to you. Now I believe that firmly. I was once troubled, so troubled that for 2 or 3 days I was ill, and so convinced was I that something had happened to Jack, and yet that he was not dead, that when, nigh 2 years afterwards, Ben came home, and I learned that it was on the day of the wreck of his ship that I had so suffered, I was not in the least surprised. Since then I have more than once had the same feelings, and have always been sure that at the time Jack was in special danger. But I have never once felt that he was dead, never once thought so, and am as certain that he is still alive as if I saw him sitting in the chair opposite to me, for I firmly believe that, did he die, I should see his spirit, or that, at any rate, I should know for certain that he had gone. So whatever you say, though reason may be altogether on your side, it will not shake my confidence one bit. I know that Jack is alive, and I believe firmly, although of this I am not absolutely sure, that he will, some day, be restored to me." "You did not tell me this before, Margaret," the Rajah said, "and what you say goes for much with me. Here in India there are many who, as is said, possess this power that you call second sight. Certainly some of the fakirs do. I have heard many tales of warnings they have given, and these have always come true. I will not try in future to damp your confidence, and will hope with you that your husband may yet be restored to you." One evening Dick remarked, "You said down at Madras, uncle, that you would some day tell me about the invasion by Hyder Ali. Will you tell me about it now?" The Rajah nodded. His sons took their seats at his feet, and Dick curled himself up on the divan by his side. "You must know," the Rajah began, "that the war was really the result of the intrigues of Sir Thomas Rumbold, the governor of Madras, and his council. In the first place, they had seriously angered the Nizam. The latter had taken a French force into his service, which the English had compelled Basult Jung to dismiss, and Madras sent an officer to his court with instructions to remonstrate with him for so doing. At the same time they gave him notice that they should no longer pay to him the tribute they had agreed upon, for the territory called the Northern Sirkars. This would have led to war, but the Bengal government promptly interfered, cancelled altogether the demands made by the Madras government, and for the time patched up the quarrel. The Nizam professed to be satisfied, but he saw that trouble might arise when the English were more prepared to enforce their demands. He therefore entered into negotiations with Hyder Ali and the Mahrattis for an alliance whose object was the entire expulsion of the British from India. The Mahrattis from Poona were to operate against Bombay, those in central India and the north were to make incursions into Bengal, the Nizam was to invade the northern Sirkars, and Hyder was to direct his force against Madras. Hyder at once began to collect military stores, and obtained large quantities from the French at Mahi, a town they still retain on the Malabar coast. The Madras government prepared to attack Mahi, when Hyder informed them that the settlements of the Dutch, French, and English on the Malabar coast, being situated within his territory, were equally entitled to his protection, and that if Mahi were attacked he should retaliate by an incursion into the province of Arcot. In spite of this threat, Mahi was captured. Hyder for a time remained quiet, but the Madras government gave him fresh cause for offence by sending a force in August of 1779 to the assistance of Basult Jung at Adani. To get there, this detachment had to pursue a route which led for 200 miles through the most difficult passes, and through the territories both of the Nizam and of Hyder. The council altogether ignored the expressed determination of both of these princes to oppose the march, and did not even observe the civility of informing them that they were going to send troops through the territory. I did not say, Dick, that this made any real difference in the end. The alliance between the three native powers being made, it was certain that war would break out shortly. Still, had it not been for their folly in giving Hyder and the Nizam a reasonable excuse for entering upon hostilities, it might have been deferred until the Madras government was better prepared to meet the storm. The Bengal government, fortunately, again stepped in and undid at least a part of the evil. It took the entire management of affairs out of the hands of Rumbold's council, and its action was confirmed by the board of directors, who censured all the proceedings, dismissed Sir Thomas Rumbold and his two chief associates from the council, and suspended other members. The prompt and conciliatory measures taken by the Bengal government appeased the resentment felt by the Nizam, and induced him to withdraw from the confederacy. Hyder, however, was bent upon war, and the imbecile government here took no steps whatever to meet the storm. The commissariat was entirely neglected, they had no transport train whatever, and the most important posts were left without a garrison. It was toward the end of June that we received the news that Hyder had left his capital at the head of an army of 90,000 men, of whom 28,000 were cavalry. He attempted no disguise as to his object, and moved, confident in his power, to conquer the Carnatic and drive the English into the sea. My father had already made his preparations. Everything was in readiness, and as soon as the news reached him he started for Madras, under the guard of his escort, with my mother and myself, most of the traders of the town, and the landowners who had gathered here in fear and trembling. It was a painful scene, as you may imagine, and I shall never forget the terrified crowds in the streets, and the wailing of the women. Many families who then left reached Madras in safety, but of those who remained in the town, all are dead or prisoners beyond the hills. Hyder descended through the pass of Changama on the 20th of July, and his horsemen spread out like a cloud over the country, burning, devastating, and slaughtering. Hyder moved with the main army slowly, occupying town after town and placing garrisons in them. You must not suppose that he devastated the whole country. He was too wise for that. He anticipated reigning over it as its sovereign, and had no wish to injure its prosperity. It was only after tracts where he considered that devastation would hamper the movements of an English army that everything was laid waste. On the 21st of August he invested Arcot, and a week later, hearing that the British army had moved out from Madras, he broke up the siege and advanced to meet them. Sir Hector Munro, the British general, was no doubt brave, but he committed a terrible blunder. Instead of marching to combine his force with that of Colonel Bailey, who was coming down from Guntur, he marched in the opposite direction to Conjeveram, sending word to Colonel Bailey to follow him. Bailey's force amounted to over 2,800 men, Munro's to 5,200. Had they united, the force would have exceeded 8,000, and could have given battle to Hyder's immense army with fair hope of success. The English have won before now with greater odds against them. My father had marched out with his cavalry, 150 strong, with Munro, of course. I was with him, and it was to him that the English general gave the dispatch to carry to Colonel Bailey. We rode hard, for at any moment Hyder's cavalry might swoop down and bar the road, but we got through safely, and the next morning, the 24th, Bailey started. The encampment was within 25 miles of Madras, and with one long forced march we could have effected a junction with Munro. The heat was tremendous, and Bailey halted that night on the bank of the river Cortalur. The bed was dry, and my father urged him to cross before halting. The colonel replied that the men were too exhausted to move farther, and that, as he would the next day be able to join Munro, it mattered not on which side of the river he encamped. That night the river rose, and for 10 days we were unable to cross. On the 4th of September we got over, but by that time Tippoo, with 5,000 picked infantry, 6,000 horse, 6 heavy guns, and a large body of irregulars, detached by Hyder to watch us, barred the way. Colonel Bailey, finding that there was no possibility of reaching Conjeveram without fighting, took up a position at a village, and on the 6th was attacked by Tippoo. The action lasted 3 hours, and although the enemy were 4 times more numerous than we were, the English beat off the attacks. We were not engaged, for against Tippoo's large cavalry force our few horsemen could do nothing, and were therefore forced to remain in the rear of the British line. But though Colonel Bailey had beaten off the attacks made on him, he felt that he was not strong enough to fight his way to Conjeveram, which was but 14 miles distant, and he therefore wrote to Sir Hector Munro to come to his assistance. For 3 days Sir Hector did nothing, but on the evening of the 8th he sent off a force composed of the flank companies of the regiments with him. These managed to make their way past the forces both of Hyder and Tippoo, and reached us without having to fire a shot. Their arrival brought our force up to over 3,700 men. Had Munro made a feigned attack upon Hyder and so prevented him from moving to reinforce Tippoo, we could have got through without much difficulty, but he did nothing, and Hyder, seeing the utter incapacity of the man opposed to him, moved off with his whole army and guns to join his son. Our force set out as soon as it was dark on the evening of the 9th, but the moment we started we were harassed by the enemy's irregulars. The march was continued for 5 or 6 miles, our position becoming more and more serious, and at last Colonel Bailey took the fatal resolution of halting till morning, instead of taking advantage of the darkness to press forward. At daybreak 50 guns opened on us. Our 10 field pieces returned the fire until our ammunition was exhausted. No orders were issued by the colonel, who had completely lost his head, so that our men were mowed down by the hundreds, until at last the enemy poured down and slaughtered them relentlessly. We did not see the end of the conflict. When the colonel gave the orders to halt, my father said to me, "This foolish officer will sacrifice all our lives. Does he think that 3,000 men can withstand 100,000, with a great number of guns? We will go while we can. We can do no good here." We mounted our horses and rode off. In the darkness we came suddenly upon a body of Tippoo's horsemen, but dashed straight at them and cut our way through, but with the loss of half our force, and did not draw rein until we reached Madras. The roar of battle had been heard at Conjeveram, and the fury and indignation in the camp at the desertion of Colonel Bailey's detachment was so great that the general at last gave orders to march to their assistance. When his force arrived within 2 miles of the scene of conflict, the cessation of fire showed that it was too late, and that Bailey's force was well nigh annihilated. Munro retired to Conjeveram, and at 3 o'clock the next morning retreated, with the loss of all his heavy guns and stores, to Madras. The campaign only lasted 21 days, and was marked by almost incredible stupidity and incapacity on the part of the 2 English commanders. We remained at Madras. My father determined that he would take no more share in the fighting until some English general, possessing the courage and ability that had always before distinguished them, took the command. In the meantime Hyder surrounded and captured Arcot after 6 weeks' delay, and then laid siege to Amboor, Chingleput, and Wandiwash. In November Sir Eyre Coote arrived from England and took the command. Confidence was at once restored, for he was a fine old soldier, and had been engaged in every struggle in India from the time of Clive. But with the whole country in the hands of Hyder, it was impossible to obtain draught animals or carts, and it was not until the middle of January that he was able to move. On the 19th he reached Chingleput, and on the 20th sent off 1,000 men to obtain possession of the fort at Karanguli. It was a strong place, and the works had been added to by Hyder, who had placed there a garrison of 700 men. The detachment would not have been sent against it had not news been obtained on the way that the garrison had fallen back to Chingleput. Our troop of cavalry went with the detachment, as my father knew the country well. To the surprise of Captain Davis, who was in command, we found the garrison on the walls. "What do you think, Rajah?" Captain Davis, who was riding by his side, asked. "My orders were that I was to take possession of the place, but it was supposed to be that I should find it empty." "I should say that you had better try, with or without orders," my father replied. "The annihilation of Bailey's force and the miserable retreat of Munro have made a terribly bad impression throughout the country, and a success is sorely needed to raise the spirits of our friends." "We will do it," Captain Davis said, and called up a few English engineers, and a company of white troops he had with him, and ordered them to blow in the gate. My father volunteered to follow close behind them, with his dismounted cavalry, and when the word was given, forward we went. Oh, it was hot work, I can tell you. The enemy's guns swept the road, and their musketry kept up an incessant roar. Many fell, but we kept on until close to the gate, and then the white troops opened fire upon Hyder's men on the wall, so as to cover the sappers, who were fixing the powder bags. They soon ran back to us. There was a great explosion, and the gates fell. With loud shouts we rushed forward into the fort, and close behind us came the Sepoys, led by Captain Davis. It took some sharp fighting before we overcame the resistance of the garrison, but fought desperately, knowing well enough that after the massacre of Bailey's force little quarter would be given them. The British loss was considerable, and 20 of my father's little company were among the killed. Great stores of provisions were found here, and proved most useful to the army. The news of the capture of Karanguli so alarmed the besiegers of Wandiwash that they at once raised the siege and retreated, and on the following day Sir Eyre Coote and his force arrived there. It was a curious thing that on the same day of the same month Sir Eyre Coote had 21 years before raised the siege of Wandiwash by a victory over the army that was covering the operation. Wandiwash had been nobly defended by a young lieutenant named Flint, who had made his way in through the enemy's lines a few hours before the treacherous native officer in command had arranged with Hyder to surrender it, and taking command had repulsed every attack, and had even made a sortie. There was now a long pause. Having no commissariat train, Sir Eyre Coote was forced to make for the seashore, and though hotly followed by Hyder, reached Cuddalore. A French fleet off the coast, however, prevented provisions being sent to him, and even after the French had retired, the Madras government were so dilatory in forwarding supplies that the army was reduced to the verge of starvation. It was not until the middle of June that a movement was possible, owing to the want of carriage. The country inland had been swept bare by Hyder, and on leaving Cuddalore, Sir Eyre Coote was obliged to follow the sea coast. When he arrived at Porto Novo, the army was delighted to find a British fleet there, and scarcely less pleased to hear that Lord Macartney had arrived as governor of Madras. Hyder's army had taken up a strong position between the camp and Cuddalore, and Sir Eyre Coote determined to give him battle. 4 days' rice was landed from the fleet, and with this scanty supply in their knapsacks, the troops marched out to attack Hyder. We formed part of the baggage guard, and had therefore an excellent opportunity of seeing the fight. The march was by the sea. The infantry moved in order of battle in 2 lines. After going for some distance, we could see the enemy's position plainly. It was a very strong one. On its right was high ground, on which were numerous batteries, which would take us in flank as we advanced, and their line extended from these heights to the sand hills by the shore. They had thrown up several batteries, and might, for aught we know, have many guns hidden on the high ground on either flank. An hour was spent in reconnoitring the enemy's position, during which they kept up an incessant cannonade, to which the English field guns attempted to reply. To me and the officers of this troop it seemed impossible that any force could advance to the attack of Hyder's position without being literally swept away by the crossfire that would be opened upon it. But when I expressed my fears, my father said, "No, you will see no repetition of that terrible affair with Bailey's column. The English have now got a commander who knows his business, and when that is the case, there is never any fear as to what the result will be. I grant that the lookout seems desperate. Hyder has all the advantage of a very strong position, a very powerful artillery, and has 6 or 7 to 1 in point of numbers. But for all that, I firmly believe that before night you will see us in possession of those hills, and Hyder's army in full flight." Presently we saw a movement. The 2 lines of infantry formed into columns, and instead of advancing toward Hyder's position, turned down toward the sea, and marched along between it and the sand hills. We were at the same time set in motion, and kept along between the infantry and the sea, so as to be under their protection if Hyder's cavalry should sweep down. All his preparations had been made under the supposition that we should advance by the main road to Cuddalore, and this movement entirely disconcerted his plans. The sandhills completely protected our advancing columns, and when they had reached a point almost in line with Hyder's centre, the artillery dashed up to the crest of the hills, and the first column passed through a break in them and moved forward against the enemy, the guns above clearing a way for them. A short halt was made, until the artillery of the second line came up, and also took their position on the hill. Then the first column, with its guns, moved forward again. Hyder had, in the meantime, moved back his line and batteries into a position at right angles to that they had before occupied, and facing the passage through the sandhills by which the English were advancing. As soon as the column issued from the valley, a tremendous fire was poured upon it, but it again formed into line of battle, and, covered by the fire of the artillery, moved forward. It was a grand sight. My father and I had left the baggage, which remained by the sea, and had ridden up onto a sandhill from which we had a view of the whole of the battleground. It was astonishing to see the line of English infantry advancing under that tremendous fire against the rising ground occupied by the dense masses of the enemy. Presently there was a movement opposite, and a vast body of cavalry moved down the slope. As they came, the red English line suddenly broke up, and, as if by magic, a number of small squares, surrounded by glistening bayonets, appeared where it had stood. Down rode Hyder's cavalry. Every gun on our side was turned upon them, but though we could see the confusion in the ranks, caused by the shot that swept them, they kept on. It seemed that the little red patches must be altogether overwhelmed by the advancing wave. But as it came closer, flashes of fire spurted out from the faces of the squares. We could see the horses recoil when close to the bayonets, and then the steam poured through the intervals between the squares. As they did so, crackling volleys broke out, while from the batteries on the sandhills an incessant fire was kept up upon them. Then, following the volleys, came the incessant rattle of musketry. The confusion among the cavalry grew greater and greater. Regiments were mixed up together, and their very numbers impeded their action. Many gallant fellows, detaching themselves from the mass, rode bravely at the squares and died on the bayonets. Others huddled together, confused and helpless against the storm of bullets and shot, and at last, as if with a sudden impulse, they rode off in all directions, and sweeping round regained their position in the rear of their infantry, while loud cheers broke from our side. The squares began again to fall into line, which, advancing steadily, drove Hyder's infantry before it. As this was going on, a strong force of infantry and cavalry, with guns, was moved round by Hyder to fall on the British rear. These, however, were met by the second line, which had hitherto remained in reserve, and after fierce fighting were driven back among the sandhills. But as they were retreating, the main body of Hyder's cavalry moved round to support the attack. Fortunately, a British schooner, which had sailed from Porto Novo when the troops started, had anchored near the shore to give what protection she could to the baggage, and now opened fire with her guns upon the cavalry, as they rode along between the sandhills and the sea, and with such effect that they halted and wavered, and when two of the batteries on the sandhills also opened fire upon them, they fell back in haste. This was Hyder's last effort. The British line continued to advance until it had gained all the positions occupied by the enemy, and these were soon in headlong flight, Hyder himself, who had been almost forced by his attendants to leave the ground, being with them. It was a wonderful victory. The English numbered but 8,476 men, of whom 306 were killed or wounded. Hyder's force was about 65,000, and his loss was not less than 10,000. The victory had an immense effect in restoring the confidence of the English troops, which had been greatly shaken by the misfortunes caused by the incapacity of Munro and Bailey. But it had no other consequences, for want of carriage, and a deficiency of provisions and equipment, prevented Sir Eyre Coote from taking the offensive, and he was obliged to confine himself to capturing a few forts near the coast. On the 27th of August the armies met again, Hyder having chosen the scene of his victory over Bailey's force to give battle, believing the position to be a fortunate one for himself. Hyder had now been joined by Tippoo, who had been present at the last battle, and his force numbered 80,000 men, while the English were 11,000 strong. I did not see the battle, as we were at the time occupied in escorting a convoy of provisions from Madras. The fight was much better contested than the previous battle had been. Hyder was well acquainted with the ground, and made skilful use of his opportunities by fortifying all the points at which he could be attacked. The fight lasted 8 hours. At last Sir Eyre Coote's first division turned the enemy's left flank by the capture of the village of Pillalore, while his second turned their right, and Hyder was obliged to fall back. But this was done in good order, and the enemy claimed that it was a drawn battle. This, however, was not the case, as the English at night encamped on the position occupied by Hyder in the morning. Still, the scandalous mismanagement at Madras continued to cripple us, but learning from the commandant at Vellore that, unless we were relieved, he would be driven to surrender for want of provisions, Sir Eyre Coote marched to his help. He met the enemy on the way. Hyder was taken by surprise, and was moving off when the English arrived. In order to give his infantry time to march away, he hurled the whole of his cavalry against the English. Again and again they charged down with the greatest bravery, and although the batteries swept their ranks with grape, and the squares received them with deadly volleys, they persevered until Tippoo had carried off his infantry and guns, and then, having lost 5,000 men, followed him. The English then moved on toward Vellore. Hyder avoided another encounter, and Vellore was relieved. Sir Eyre Coote handed over to its commandant almost the whole of the provisions carried by the army, and having thus supplied the garrison with sufficient food for 6 weeks, marched back to Madras, his troops suffering greatly from famine on the way. Nothing took place during the winter, except that Sir Eyre Coote again advanced and revictualled Vellore. In March a French fleet arrived off the coast, landed a force of 3,000 men to assist Hyder, and informed him that a much larger division was on its way. Fortunately this did not arrive, many of the ships being captured by the English on their way out. In the course of the year there were several fights, but none of any consequence, and things remained in the same state until the end of the year, when on the 7th of December Hyder died, and Tippoo was proclaimed his successor. Bussy arrived with fresh reinforcements from France in April, and took the command of Hyder's French contingent, and in June there was a battle between him and a force commanded by General Stewart, the successor to Sir Eyre Coote, who had been obliged to resign from ill health, and who had died in the spring. The French position was a very strong one, and was protected by numerous field works. The battle was the most sanguinary fought during the war, considering the numbers engaged. The English carried a portion of the works and captured 14 guns, and as the French retired during the night were able to claim a victory. Their loss, however, was over 1,000, while that of the French was not more than a third of that number. During that year there was little fighting down here. A Bombay force, however, under the command of General Matthews, captured Bednore, but Tippoo hastened against him with a great force, besieged Bednore, and forced it to surrender after a desperate defence. Tippoo violated the terms of capitulation and made the defenders prisoners. Bangalore was next besieged by him, but resisted for nearly 9 months, and only surrendered in January of 1784. Tippoo had by this time lost the services of his French auxiliaries, as England and France had made peace at home. Negotiations between Tippoo and the English went on till March, when a treaty was signed. By its provisions Tippoo should have handed back all his prisoners. He murdered large numbers of them, but 1,000 British soldiers and 1,600 sepoys obtained their liberty. No one knows how many were retained of the number, calculated at 200,000, of natives carried off from the counties overrun by Hyder's troops. Only 2,000 were released. More British would doubtless have been freed had it not been for the scandalous cowardice of the 3 men sent up as British commissioners to Tippoo. They were treated with the greatest insult and contempt by him, and, in fear of their lives, were too glad to accept the prisoners he chose to hand over, without troubling themselves in the slightest about the rest, whom they basely deserted and left to their fate. Chapter 5. War Declared. That gives you a general idea, Dick, of the war with Tippoo. I saw little of the events after the Battle of Porto Novo, as my father was taken ill soon after and died at Madras. Seeing that there was no probability whatever of the English driving Hyder back until they had much larger forces and a much better system of management, I remained in Madras until peace was made. Then I came back here, rebuilt the palace, and have since been occupied in trying to restore the prosperity of my poor people. It is, I feel, a useless task, for it is certain that ere long the English will again be engaged with Mysore, and if they are, it is well nigh certain that Tippoo's hordes will again sweep down from the hills and carry ruin and desolation everywhere. He would, as Hyder had, have the advantage on his side at the beginning of the war. He has a score of passes to choose from, and can descend on to the plain by any one he may select. And even were there a force here capable of giving battle to the whole Mysorean army, it could not watch all the passes, and as to do so, the army would have to be broken up into a dozen commands. Tippoo will therefore again be able to ravage the plains for weeks perhaps before the English can force him to give battle. But there is no army at present in existence of sufficient strength to meet him. The Madras force would have to wait until reinforcements arrived from Calcutta. It was bad before, but it will be worse now. Hyder no doubt slaughtered many, but he was not cruel by nature. He carried off enormous quantities of people with their flocks and herds, but he did this to enrich Mysore with their labour, and did not treat them with unnecessary cruelty. Tippoo, on the other hand, is a human tiger. He delights in torturing his victims, and slays his prisoners from pure love of bloodshed. He is proud of the title of tiger. His footstool is a tiger's head, and the uniforms of his infantry are a sort of imitation of a tiger's stripes. He has military talent, and showed great judgment in command of his division. Indeed, most of the successes gained during the last war were his work. Since then he has laboured incessantly to improve his armies. Numbers of regiments have been raised, composed of the captives carried off from here and from the west coast. They are drilled in European fashion by the English captives he still holds in his hands. But why, uncle, instead of giving time to Tippoo to come down here, should we not march up the passes and compel him to keep his army up there to defend Seringapatam? Because, Dick, in the first place, there is not an army strong enough to do so. But even were there a force of 50,000 men at Madras, they could not take the offensive in time. An English army cannot move without a great train to carry ammunition, stores, and provisions, and to get such a train together would be the work of months. As I have been telling you, during the 3 years the last war lasted, the Madras authorities were never able to collect such a train, and the consequence was that their army was unable to go more than 2 or 3 days' march from the city. On the other hand, Tippoo could any day order that 3 days' supply of rice or grain should be served out to each soldier, and could set out on his march the following morning, as from the moment he reached the plains his cavalry would have the whole of the resources of the country at their mercy." "I see, Uncle. Then, if war broke out, you would at once go to Madras again?" "There would be nothing else to do, Dick. I should send everything of value down there, as soon as I saw that war was inevitable. The traders here have already begun to prepare. The shops are half empty, for they have not replaced goods they have sold, and a very few hours would suffice for everything worth taking to be cleared out of the town. The country round here is comparatively uninhabited, and but a small portion of it tilled, so great was the number carried off by Hyder. Next time they will take to the hills at once, and I believe that many have already stored up grain in hiding places there. This time it may be hoped that a few weeks or months at most may see Tippoo driven back, and for that time the peasants can manage to exist in the hills. No doubt the richer sort, who have large flocks of goats and many cattle, will, as soon as danger threatens, drive them down to Madras, where they are sure to fetch good prices for the use of the army. I have already told all men who have bullock carts and teams that they can, if forced to leave home, earn a good living by taking service in the English transport train. I hope, therefore, that the results will not be so disastrous as before. The town may be burnt down again, but unless they blow up my palace, they can do little harm to it. When I rebuilt it, seeing the possibility of another war, I would not have any wood whatever used in its construction. Therefore, when the hangings are taken down and the furniture from these rooms cleared out, there will be nothing to burn, and they are not likely to waste powder in blowing it up. As to the town, I warned the people who returned that it might be again destroyed before long, and therefore there has been no solid building. The houses have all been lightly run up with wood, which is plentiful enough in the hills, and no great harm, therefore, will be done if it is again burnt down. The pagoda and palace are the only stone buildings in it. They did some harm to the former last time by firing a shot at it for a day or two, and as you can see for yourself, no attempt has since been made to repair it, and I do not suppose they will trouble to damage it further. So, you see, Dick, we are prepared for the worst." "Will you fight again, as you did last time, Uncle?" "I do not know, Dick. I show my loyalty to the English rule by repairing to the capital, but my force is too small to render much service. You see, my revenues have greatly diminished, and I cannot afford to keep up so large a force as my father could. Fortunately, his savings had been considerable, and from these I was able to build this palace, and to succour my people, and have still enough to keep up my establishment here without pressing the cultivators of the soil for taxes. This year is the first that I have drawn any revenue from that source, but at any rate I am not disposed to keep up a force which, while it would be insufficient to be of any great value in a war like this, would be a heavy tax on my purse." "Even the force you have must be that, Uncle." "Not so much as you would think, Dick, with your English notions. The pay here is very small, so small that it would seem to you impossible for a man to live on it, and yet many of these men have wives and families. All of them have patches of land that they cultivate, only 20 who are changed once a month being kept on duty. They are necessary, for I should have but little respect from my people, and less still from other rajahs, did I not have sentries at the gates and a guard ready to turn out in honour of any visitor who might arrive, to say nothing of an escort of half a dozen men when I ride through the country. Of course, all can be called out whenever I want them, as, for example, when I rode to Madras to meet you. The men think themselves well off upon the pay of 3 rupees a month, as they are practically only on duty 2 months each year, and have the rest of the time to cultivate their fields. Therefore, with the pay of the officers, my troop only costs me about 400 rupees a month, which is, you know, equivalent to 40 English pounds, so that you cannot call it an expensive army, even if it is kept for show rather than force." "No, indeed, Uncle. It seems ridiculous that a troop of 100 men can be kept up for £500 a year. Of course, the men have some little privileges, Dick. They pay no rent or taxes for their lands. This is a great thing for them, and really costs me nothing, as there is so much land lying uncultivated. Then, when they are too old for service, they have a pension of 2 rupees a month for life, and on that and what little land they can cultivate, they are comparatively comfortable." "Well, it does not seem to me, Uncle, that soldiering is a good trade in this country." "I don't know that it is a good trade in the money way anywhere. After all, the pay out here is quite as high, in comparison with the ordinary rate of earning of a peasant, as it is in England. It is never the pay that tempts soldiers. Among young men there are always great numbers who prefer the life to that of a peasant, working steadily from daylight to dark, and I don't know that I altogether blame them." "Then you think, Uncle, there is no doubt whatever that there will be war?" "Not a shadow of a doubt, Dick. Indeed, it may be said to have begun already, and like the last it is largely due to the incapacity of the government of Madras." "I have just received a message from Arcot," the Rajah said 2 months later, "and I must go over and see the Nabob." "I thought," Mrs. Holland said, "that Tripataly was no longer subject to him. I understood that our father was made independent of Arcot." "No, Margaret, not exactly that. The Nabob had involved himself in very heavy debts, during the great struggle. The Company had done something to help him, but were unable to take all his debts on their shoulders, and indeed there was no reason why they should have done so, for although during most of the war he was their ally, he was fighting on his own behalf and not on theirs. In the war with Hyder it was different. He was then quite under English influence, and, indeed, could scarcely be termed independent, and as he suffered terribly, his lands were wasted, his towns besieged, and his people driven off into slavery, the Company are at present engaged in negotiations for assisting him to pay his debts, which are very heavy. It was before you left, when the Nabob was much pressed for money, and had at that time no claim on the Company, that our father bought of him a perpetual commutation of tribute, taxes, and other moneys and subsidiaries payable by Tripataly. Thus, I am no longer tributary to Arcot. Nevertheless, this forms a portion of the Nabob's territories, and I cannot act as if I were an independent prince. I could not make a treaty with Mysore on my own account, and it is clear that neither Arcot nor the English could allow me to do so, for in that case Mysore could erect fortresses here, and could use Tripataly as an advanced post on the plain. Therefore I am still subject to the Nabob, and could be called upon for military service by him. Indeed, that is one of the reasons why, even if I could afford it, I should not care to keep up a force of any strength. As it is, my troop is too small to be worth summoning. The Nabob has remonstrated with me more than once, but since the war with Hyder I have had a good excuse, namely that the population has so decreased that my lands lie untilled, and it would be impossible for me to raise a larger force. I have, however, agreed that, in case of a fresh war, I will raise an additional 100 cavalry. I expect it is in relation to this that he has sent for me to Arcot. We know that the English are bound by their treaty with Travancore to declare war. They ought, in honour, to have done it long ago, but they were unprepared. Now that they are nearly ready, they may do so at any time, and indeed the Nabob may have learned that fighting has begun. The lookout is bad. The government of Madras is just as weak and as short-sighted as it was during Hyder's war. There is but one comfort, and that is that Lord Cornwallis at Calcutta has far greater power than his predecessors, and as he is an experienced soldier, and is said to be an energetic man, he may bring up reinforcements from Calcutta without loss of time, and also set the troops of Bombay in motion. I expect that, as before, things will go badly at first, but I hope that, this time, we shall end by giving Mysore so heavy a lesson that she will be powerless for mischief in future." "And release all the captives," Mrs. Holland exclaimed, clasping her hands. "I sincerely trust so, Margaret," her brother said gravely, "but after what happened last time we must not be sanguine. Scattered about as they may be, in the scores of little hill forts that dot the whole country, we can, unhappily, never be sure that all are delivered, when we have only the word of a treacherous tyrant like Tippoo. We know that last time he kept back hundreds of prisoners, among whom, as we may hope, was your husband, and it may be that, however completely he may be defeated, he may yet retain some of them, knowing full well it is impossible that all these hill forts and their dungeons can be searched. However, doubtless, if an English army marches to Seringapatam, many will be recovered, though we have reason to fear that many will, as before, be murdered before our arrival." When the Rajah returned from Arcot on the following day, he brought back the news that General Meadows had moved to the frontier of Karur, 50 miles beyond Trichinopoly, and that the war was really about to begin. "You know," he said, "how matters stand up to now. Tippoo, after making peace with the Nizam and the Mahrattis, with whom he had been engaged in hostilities for some time, turned his attention to the western coast, where Coorg and Malabar had risen in rebellion. After, as usual, perpetrating horrible atrocities, and after sending a large proportion of the population as slaves to Mysore, he marched against Travancore. Now, Travancore was specially mentioned in the Treaty of Mangalore as one of the allies of the English, with whom Tippoo bound himself not to make war, and had he not been prepared to fight the English, he would not have attacked their ally. The excuse for attacking Travancore was that some of the fugitives from Coorg and Malabar had taken refuge there. Seeing that Tippoo was bent upon hostilities, Lord Cornwallis and his council at Calcutta directed, as I learnt from an official at Madras, the authorities there to begin at once to make preparations for war. Instead of doing so, Mr. Holland, the governor, gave the Rajah the shameful and cowardly advice to withdraw his protection from the fugitives. The Rajah refused to comply with such counsel, and after some months spent in negotiations, Tippoo attacked the walls that run along the northern frontier of Travancore. Now, that was about 6 months ago. Yes, it was on the 28th of December, so it is just 6 months. His troops, 14,000 strong, made their way without difficulty through a breach, but they were suddenly attacked by a small body of Travancore men. A panic seized them. They rushed back to the breach, and in the wild struggle to pass through it, no less than 2,000 were either killed or crushed to death. It was nearly 3 months before Tippoo renewed his attack. The lines were weak, and his army was so strong that resistance was impossible. A breach 3/4 of a mile in length was made in the wall, and, marching through this, he devastated Travancore from end to end. His unaccountable delay before assaulting the position has been of great advantage to us. Had he attacked at once, instead of wasting his time before Travancore, he would have found the Carnatic so defenceless and as completely at his mercy as Hyder did. He would still have done so, had it depended upon Madras, but as the authorities here did nothing, Lord Cornwallis took the matter into his own hands. He was about to come here himself when General Meadows, formerly Governor of Bombay, arrived, invested by the Company with the offices of both Governor and Commander-in-Chief. Meadows landed here late in February, and at once set to work to prepare for war. Lord Cornwallis sent from Calcutta a large amount of money, stores, and ammunition, and a battalion of artillerymen. The sepoys objected to travel by sea, as their caste rules forbade them to do so, and he therefore sent off 6 battalions of infantry by land, and the Nabob tells me they are expected to arrive in 4 or 5 weeks' time. The Nabob of Arcot and the Rajah of Tanjore, both of whom are very heavily in debt to the government, are ordered during the continuance of the war to place their revenues at its disposal, a liberal allowance being made to them both for their personal expenses. Tippoo is still in Travancore, at least he was there 10 days ago, and has been endeavouring to negotiate. The Nabob tells me he believes that the object of General Meadows, in advancing from Trichinopoly to Karur, is to push on to Coimbatore, where he will, if he arrives before Tippoo, cut him off from his return to his capital, and as Meadows has a force of 15,000 men, he ought to be able to crush the tyrant at a blow. I fear, however, there is little chance of this. The Mysore troops move with great rapidity, and as soon as Tippoo hears that the English army is marching toward Karur, he is sure to take alarm, and by this time has probably passed Coimbatore on his way back. With all his faults, Tippoo is a good general, and the Nabob's opinion, and I quite agree with him, is that as soon as he regains the tableland of Mysore, he will take advantage of the English army being far away to the south, and will pour down through the passes into this part of the Carnatic, which is at present absolutely defenceless. This being the case, I shall at once get ready to leave for Madras, and shall move as soon as I learn for certain that Tippoo has slipped past the English. The Nabob has called upon me to join him with my little body of cavalry, and as soon as the news comes that Tippoo is descending the passes, I shall either join him or the English army. That will be a matter to decide afterwards. "You will take me with you, of course, Uncle?" Dick asked eagerly. "Certainly, Dick. If you are old enough to undertake the really perilous adventure of going up in disguise to Mysore, you are certainly old enough to ride with me. Besides, we may hope that, this time, the war is not going to be as one-sided as it was the last time, and that we may end by reaching Seringapatam, in which case we may rescue your father, if he is still alive, very much more easily than it could be managed in the way you propose." The news that the English army had marched to Karur, and that there was no force left to prevent the Mysoreans from pouring down from the hills, spread quickly, and when Dick went out with the 2 boys into the town, groups of people were talking earnestly in the streets. Some of them came up and asked respectfully if there was any later news. "Nothing later than you have heard," Dick said. "The Rajah is not going away yet, Sahib." No, he will not leave unless he hears that Tippoo has returned with his army to Seringapatam. Then he will go at once, for the Sultan might come down through the passes at any moment, and can get here a fortnight before the English army can return from Karur." "Yes, it will be no use waiting here to be eaten up, Sahib. Do you think Conjeveram would be safe? Because it is easy to get down there by boat." "I should think so. Hyder could not take it last time, and the English army is much stronger than it was then. Besides, there will be 6,000 men arriving from Bengal in a month's time, so I should think there is no fear of Conjeveram being taken. It is a little trouble getting there, but it is a long journey to Madras. We could go down with our families and goods in 2 days in a boat, but there would not be boats enough for all, and it will be best, therefore, that some should go at once, for if all wait until there is news that Tippoo is coming, many will not be able to get away in time." "No, not in boats," Dick agreed, "but in 3 days a bullock cart could get you there." Next day, several of the shops containing the most valuable goods were shut up, and day by day the number remaining open grew smaller. "It is as I expected," the Rajah said one morning, as he came into the room where the family was sitting. "A messenger has just come in from the Nabob with the news that sickness broke out among the army, as soon as they arrived at Karur, and in 24 hours 1,000 men were in hospital. This delayed the movement, and when they arrived at Coimbatore they were too late. Tippoo and his army had already passed, moving by forced marches back to Mysore. Finish your packing, ladies. We will start at daybreak tomorrow morning. I secured 3 boats 4 days ago, and have been holding them in readiness. Rajbullub will go in charge of you. There is not the least fear of Tippoo being here for another fortnight at the earliest. I shall ride with the troop. Dick and the boys will go with me. We shall meet you at Conjeveram. I have already arranged with some of our people, who have gone on in their bullock carts with their belongings, and will unload them there, to be in readiness to take our goods on to Madras, so there will be no delay in getting forward." By nightfall the apartments were completely dismantled. The furniture was all stowed away in a vault which the Rajah had had constructed for the purpose, when the palace was rebuilt. Access was obtained to it through the floor in one of the private apartments. The floor was of tessellated marble, but some 10 squares of it lifted up in a mass, forming together a trap door, from which steps led down into the vault. When the block was lowered again, the fit was so accurate that, after sweeping a little dust over the joint, the opening was quite imperceptible to anyone not aware of the hiding place. The cushions of the divans were taken down here, as well as the furniture, and all the less valuable carpets, rugs, and hangings, while the costlier articles were rolled up into bales for transport. The silver cups and other valuables were packed in boxes, and were during the night carried by coolies down to the boats, over which a guard was placed until morning. Provisions for the journey down the river were also placed on the boat. The palace was astir long before daybreak. The cushions that had been slept on during the night were carried down to the boats, the boxes of wearing apparel closed and fastened, and a hasty meal was taken. The sun was just rising when they started. One boat had been fitted up with a bower of green boughs for the use of the 2 ladies and their 4 attendants. The other 2 carried the baggage. After seeing them push off, the Rajah, his sons, and Dick returned to the palace. Here, for a couple of hours, he held a sort of audience, and gave his advice to the townspeople, and any others who came, in considerable numbers, to consult with him. When this was done, they went into the courtyard, where all was ready for their departure. The troop had, during the past week, been raised to 200 men, many of the young cultivators coming eagerly forward, as soon as they heard that the Rajah was going to increase his troop, being anxious to take a share in the adventures that might be looked for, and to avenge the sufferings that had been inflicted on their friends by Hyder's marauders. They were a somewhat motley troop, but this mattered little, as uniformity was unknown among the forces of the native princes. The majority were stout young fellows. All provided their own horses and arms, and although the former lacked the weight and bone of English cavalry horses, they were capable of performing long journeys, and of existing on rations on which an English horse would starve. All were well armed, for any deficiency had been made up from the Rajah's store, and from this a large number of guns had, 3 days before, been distributed among such of the ryots as intended to take to the hills on the approach of the enemy. Ammunition had also been distributed among them. Every man in the troop carried a shield and tulwar, and on his back was slung a musket or spear, and there were few without pistols in their girdles. They rode halfway to Conjeveram, and stopped for the night at a village. the men sleeping in the open air, while the Rajah, his sons, and Dick were entertained by the chief man of the place. The next morning they rode into Conjeveram, where, just at sunset, the boats also arrived. The troop encamped outside the town, while the Rajah and his party occupied some rooms that had been secured beforehand for them. In the morning, the ladies proceeded in a native carriage, with the troop, an officer and 10 men following in charge of the bullock carts containing the baggage. On reaching Madras, they encamped on the Maidan, a large open space used as a drill ground for the troops garrisoned there, and the Rajah and his party established themselves in the house occupied by him on the occasion of his last visit. The next day, the Rajah went to the Government House and had an interview with the Deputy Governor. If Tippoo comes down from the hills, he will not be able to take the field against him, and will need all his forces to defend Arcot, Vellore, and his smaller forts, and cavalry would be of no real use to him. Your troop would be of much greater utility to the battalions from Bengal when they arrive. They will be here in 3 weeks or so, and as soon as they come I will attach you to them. I will write to the Nabob, saying that you are about to join him, but that in the interest of the general defence I had thought better, at present, to attach you to the Bengal contingent. You see, they will be entirely new to the country, and it will be a great advantage to them to have a troop like yours, many of whom are well acquainted with the roads and general geography of the country. Your speaking English, too, will of course add to your usefulness." "I have a nephew with me who speaks English perfectly, and also Hindustani," the Rajah said. "He is a smart young fellow, and I have no doubt that the officer in command would be able to make him very useful. He is eager to be of service. His father, who was an Englishman, was wrecked some years ago on the west coast, and sent up a prisoner to Mysore. He was not one of those handed over at the time of the peace, but whether he has been murdered, or is still a prisoner in Tippoo's hands, we do not know. My sister came out with the boy 3 or 4 months ago to endeavour to obtain some news of him. I will make a note of it, Rajah. I have no doubt that he will be of great use to Colonel Cockerell." In the last week in July, the Rajah moved with his troop to Conjeveram, and on the 1st of August the Bengal forces arrived there. They were joined at once by 3 regiments of Europeans, 1 of native cavalry, and a strong force of artillery, raising their numbers to 9,500 men. Colonel Kelly took command of the force, and begged the Rajah to advance with his horsemen at once to the foot of the ghauts, to break it up into half troops, and to capture or destroy any small parties of horse Tippoo might send down, by any of the passes, to reconnoitre the country, and to ascertain the movements and strength of the British forces. He was also to endeavour to obtain as much information as he could of what was going on in Mysore, and to ascertain whether Tippoo was still with his army, watching General Meadows in the west, or was moving, as if with the intention of taking advantage of the main force of the English being away south, to descend into the Carnatic. The order was a very acceptable one to the Rajah. His troop made a good appearance enough when in company with those of the Nabob of Arcot, but he could not but feel that they looked a motley body by the side of the trained native and European troops, and he was frequently angered by hearing the jeering comments of English soldiers to each other, when he rode past them with his troop, and had not a little astonished the speakers, more than once, by turning round on his horse and abusing them hotly in their own language. He was, therefore, glad to be off. For such work his men were far better fitted than they were even the native cavalry in the Company's service. They were stout, active fellows, accustomed to the hills, and speaking the dialect used by the shepherds and villagers among the ghauts. Proceeding northward through Vellore, he there divided his force into 4 bodies. He himself, with 50 men, took up a position at the mouth of the pass of Amboor. Another 50 were sent to the pass of Mugni, to the west of Chittoor, under the command of Anwar, the captain of the troop. The rest were distributed among the minor passes. Dick remained with his uncle, who established himself in a village 7 miles up the pass. He was well satisfied with the arrangement, for he was anxious to learn to go about among the hills as a spy, and was much more likely to get leave from his uncle to do so than he would have been from any of the officers of the troop, who would not have ventured to allow the Rajah's nephew to run into any danger. In the second place, his especial friend among the officers, a youth named Surajah, son of Rajbullab, was with the detachment. Surajah had been especially picked out by the Rajah as Dick's companion. He generally joined him in his rides, and they had often gone on shooting excursions among the hills. He was about 3 years Dick's senior, but in point of height there was but little difference between them. Every day, half the troop under an officer rode up the pass until within a mile of the fort near the summit, garrisoned by Mysorean troops. They were able to obtain but little information, for the villages towards the upper end of the pass were all deserted and in ruins, the inhabitants never having ventured back since Hyder's invasion. The Rajah was vexed at being able to learn nothing of what was passing on the plateau, and was therefore more disposed than he might otherwise have been to listen to Dick's proposal. "Don't you think, Uncle," the latter said one evening, "that I might try to learn something by going up with Surajah alone? We could strike off into the hills, as if on a shooting expedition, just as we used to do from Tripataly, except that I should stain my face and hands. The people in the villages on the top of the ghauts are, everyone says, simple and quiet. They have no love for Tippoo or Mysore, but are content to pay their taxes and to work quietly in their fields. There will be little fear of our being interfered with by them." "You might find a party of Tippoo's troops in one of the villages, Dick, and get into trouble." "I don't see why we should, Uncle. Of course, we should not go up dressed as we are, but as shikarees, and when we went into a village should begin by asking whether the people are troubled with any tigers in the neighbourhood. You see, I especially came out here to go into Mysore in disguise, and I should be getting a little practice in this way, besides obtaining news for you." "I am certainly anxious to get news, Dick. So far, I have had nothing to send down, except that the reports from all the passes agree in saying that they have learned nothing of any movement on the part of Tippoo, and that no spies have come down the passes, or any armed party whatever. This is good, so far as it goes, but it only shows that the other passes are, like this, entirely deserted. Therefore, we really know nothing whatever. Even at this moment, Tippoo might have 50,000 men gathered on the crest of the hills, ready to pour down tomorrow through one of the passes, and therefore, as I do not think you would be running any great danger, I consent to your going with Surajah on a scouting expedition, on foot, among the hills. As you say, you must, of course, disguise yourselves as peasants. You had better, in addition to your guns, each take a brace of pistols, and so armed, even if any of the villagers were inclined to be hostile, they would not care about interfering with you." "Thank you, Uncle. When would you expect us back, if we start tomorrow morning?" "That must be entirely in your hands, Dick. You would hardly climb the ghauts and light upon a village in one day, and it might be necessary to go farther before you could obtain any news. It is a broken country, with much jungle for some distance beyond the hills, and the villages lying off the roads will have but little communication with each other, and might know nothing whatever of what has happened in the cultivated plains beyond. At any rate, you must not go into any village on the roads leading to the heads of the passes, for there are forts everywhere, and you would be certain to find parties of troops stationed in them. Even before war broke out, I knew that this was the case, as they were stationed there to prevent any captives, native or European, escaping from Mysore. You must therefore strictly avoid all the main roads, even though it may be necessary to proceed much farther before you can get news. I should think, if we say 3 days going and as many returning, it will be as little as we can count upon, and I shall not begin to feel at all uneasy if you do not reappear for a week. It is of no use your returning without some information as to what is going on in Mysore, and it would be folly to throw away your work and trouble when, in another day or two, you might get the news you want. I shall therefore leave it entirely to your discretion." Greatly pleased at having succeeded beyond his expectations, Dick at once sought out Surajah. The latter was very gratified when he heard that he was to accompany the young Sahib on such an expedition, and at once set about the necessary preparations. There was no difficulty in obtaining in the village the clothes required for their disguises, and one of the sheep intended for the following day's rations was killed, and a leg boiled. If we take, in addition to this, 10 pounds of flour, a gourd of ghee, and a little pan for frying the cakes in, we shall be able to get on without having to buy food for 4 or 5 days. And, of course, when we are once among the villages, we shall have no difficulty in getting more. You had better cut the meat off the bone and divide it in 2 portions, and divide the flour too. Then we can each carry our share." "I will willingly carry it all, Sahib." "Not at all, Surajah. We will each take our fair share. You see, we shall have a gun, pistols, ammunition, and a tulwar, and that, with 7 or 8 pounds of food each, and our water bottles, will be quite enough to carry up the ghauts. The only thing we want now is some stain." "I will get something that will do, and bring it with me in the morning, Sahib. It won't take you a minute to put it on. I will come for you at the first gleam of daylight." Dick returned to the cottage he occupied with his uncle, and told him what preparations they had made for their journey, and they sat talking over the details for another hour. The Rajah's last words, as they lay down for the night, were, "Don't forget to take a blanket each. You will want it for sleeping in the open, which you will probably have to do several times, although you may occasionally be able to find shelter in a village." By the time the sun rose, the next morning, they were well upon their way. They had a good deal of toilsome climbing, but by nightfall had surmounted the most difficult portions of the ascent, and encamped, when it became dark, in a small wood. Here they lighted a fire, cooked some cakes of flour, and with these and the cold meat made a hearty meal. They had during the day halted twice, and had breakfasted and lunched off some bread, of which they had brought sufficient for the day's journey. "I suppose there is no occasion to watch, Surajah?" "I don't know, Sahib. I do not think it will be safe for us both to sleep. There are, as you know, many tigers among these hills, and although they would not approach us as long as the fire is burning brightly, they might steal up and carry one of us off when the fire gets low. I will therefore watch." "I certainly should not let you do that without taking my turn," Dick said, "and I feel so tired with the day's work that I do not think I could keep awake for 10 minutes. It would be better to sleep in a tree than that." "You would not get much sleep in a tree, Sahib. I have done it once or twice when I have been hunting in a tiger-infested neighbourhood, but I got scarcely any sleep, and I was so stiff in the morning that I could hardly walk. I would rather sit up all night and keep up a good fire than do that." Dick thought for a minute or two, and then got up and walked about under the trees, keeping his eyes fixed upon the branches overhead. "This will do," he said at last. "Come here, Surajah. There. You see those two branches coming out on the same direction? At one point they are about 5 or 6 feet apart. We might fasten our blankets side by side, with the help of the straps of our water bottles and the slings of the guns, so as to make what are called on board ship hammocks, and lie there perfectly safe and comfortable." Surajah nodded. "I have a coil of leather thong, Sahib. I thought that it might be useful if we wanted to bind a prisoner, or for any other purpose, so I stuffed it into my waist sash." "That is good. Let us lose no time, for I am quite ready for sleep. I will climb up first." In 10 minutes the blankets were secured, fastened side by side between the branches. Surajah descended, threw another armful of wood onto the fire, placed their meat in the crotch of a bough, 6 feet above the ground, and then climbed the tree again. Thus they were soon lying side by side in their blankets. These bagged rather inconveniently under their weight, but they were too tired to mind trifles, and were very soon fast asleep. Dick did not wake until Surajah called him. It was already broad daylight. His companion had slipped down quietly, stirred up the embers of the fire, thrown on more wood, and cooked some chapatis before waking him. "It is too bad, Surajah," Dick said, as he looked down. "You ought to have woke me. I will unfasten these blankets before I get down. It will save time after breakfast." Half an hour later they were again on their way, and shortly came upon a boy herding some goats. He looked doubtfully at them, but seeing that they were not Mysorean soldiers, he did not attempt to fly. "How far is it to the next village, lad?" Surajah asked, "and which is the way? We are shikaris, and are there any tigers about?" "Oh, plenty of them," the boy said. "I drive the goats to a strong high stockade every evening, and would not come out before the sun rose, for all the money they say the sultan has. Make for that tree, and close to it you will see a spring. Follow that down. It will take you to the village." After walking 6 hours they came to the village. It was a place of some little size, but there were few people about. Women came to the doors to look at Surajah and Dick as they came along. "Where are you from?" an old man asked, as he came out from his cottage. "From down the mountainside. Tigers are getting scarce there, and we thought we would come over and see what we could do here." "Here there are many tigers," the old man said. "For the last 20 years the wars have taken most of our young men away. Some are forced to go against their will, for when the order comes to the head man of the village that the sultan requires so many soldiers, he is forced to pick out those best suited for service. Others go of their own free will, thinking soldiering easier work than tilling the fields, besides the chance of getting rich booty. So there are but few shikaris, and the tigers multiply and are a curse to us. We are but poor people, but if you choose to stay here for a while, we will pay something for every tiger you kill, and we will send round to the other villages within 10 miles, and doubtless every one of them will contribute, so that you might get enough to pay for your exertions." "We will think of it," Surajah replied. "We did not intend to stop in one village, but propose to travel about in the jungle-covered district, and wherever we hear complaints of a tiger committing depredations, we will stop and do our best to kill the evil beast. We mean first to find out where they are most troublesome, and then we shall work back again. We hear that the sultan gives good prices for those taken alive." "I have heard so," the old man said, "but none have been caught alive here, or by anyone in the villages round. The sultan generally gets them from the royal forests, where none are allowed to shoot, save with his permission. Sometimes, when there is a lack of them there, his hunters come into these districts and catch them in pitfalls, and have nets and ropes with which the tigers are bound and taken away." A little crowd had by this time collected round them, and the women, when they heard that the strangers were shikaris, who had come up with the intention of killing tigers, brought them bowls of milk, cakes, and other presents. "I suppose, now that the sultan is away at war," Dick said, "his hunters do not come here for tigers." "We know nothing of his wars," a woman said. "They take our sons from us, and we do not see them again. We did hear a report that he had gone with an army to conquer Travancore, but why he should want to do it, none of us can make out. His dominions are as wide as the heart of man can require. It is strange that he cannot rest contented, but, like his father, should be always taking our sons away to fight. However, these things are beyond the understanding of poor people like us, but we can't help thinking that it would be better if he were to send his armies to destroy all the tigers. If he would do that, we should not grudge the sums we have to pay when the tax gatherers come round." After pausing for an hour in the village, they continued on their way. 2 or 3 other small collections of huts were passed, but it was not until the evening of the next day that they issued from the jungle-covered country into the cultivated plain. At none of the places they had passed was there anything known as to Tippoo or his army, but they were told that there were parties of troops in all the villages along the edge of the plain, as well as in the passages. "We must be careful now, Surajah," Dick said, as after a long day's march they sat down to rest, at a distance of half a mile from a large village. "Our tale that we are shikaris will not do here. Had that really been our object, we should have stopped at the first place we came to, and, at any rate, we should not have come beyond the jungle. We might still say that we are shikaris, but that tigers had become scarce on the other side of the hills, and hearing a talk that Tippoo and the English are going to war with each other, we made up our minds to go to Seringapatam and enlist in his army." "Now, that would do very well," Surajah agreed. "They would have no reason for doubting us, and even if the officer here were to suggest that we should enlist under him, we could do so, as there would be no difficulty in slipping away and making off into the jungle again." They waited until the sun set, and then walked on to the village. They had scarcely entered when 2 armed men stopped them and questioned them whence they came. Surajah repeated the story they had agreed upon, and the men appeared quite satisfied. "You will be just in time," one said. "We have news that the sultan has just moved with his army to Seringapatam. Officers came here only yesterday to buy up cattle and grain. These are to be retained here until orders are received where they are to be sent, so I should say that he is coming this way, and will be going down the passes, as Hyder did. We shall be very glad, for I suppose we shall join as he passes along. It has been dull work here, and we are looking forward to gaining our share of the loot. It would be just as well for you to join us here now, as to go on to Seringapatam." "It would save us a long tramp," Surajah agreed. "We will think it over, and maybe we will have a talk with your officer, tomorrow morning." They sauntered along with the men, talking as they went, and so escaped being questioned by other soldiers. Presently they made the excuse that they wanted to buy some flour and ghee before the shops were closed, and, with a friendly nod to the 2 soldiers, stopped before the stall of a peasant who had, on a small stand in front of him, a large jar of ghee. Having purchased some, they went a little farther and laid in a fresh supply of flour. "Things are very dear," Surajah remarked. "There is very little left in the village," the man said. "All the flour was bought up yesterday for the sultan's army, which they say is coming in this direction, and I have only got what you see here. It has been pounded by my wife and some other women since morning." "That's good enough," Dick said, as they walked away. "Our work is done, Surajah, and it is not likely that we should learn anything more, if we were to stop here for a week. Let us turn down between these houses, and make our way round behind. We might be questioned again by a fresh party of soldiers, if we were to go along the street." They kept along on the outskirts of the village, regaining the road by which they had come, and walked on until they reached the edge of the jungle. Going a short distance among the trees, they collected some sticks, lit a fire, and sat down to cook their meal. At the last village or 2 they had heard but little of tigers, and now agreed that they could safely lie down, and that it would not be necessary for them to rig up their blankets as hammocks, as they had done on the first 2 nights. Chapter 6: A Perilous Adventure. They retraced their steps without adventure until they reached the village they had first stopped at. "There are soldiers here," Surajah exclaimed as they entered. "We can't help it now," Dick said. "There's nothing for it but to go on boldly. I suppose that Tippoo has sent troops into all these frontier villages to prevent any chance of news of his movements being taken to the plains. Ah, there's the old chap who spoke to us last time. Let's stop at once and talk with him." "So you are back again?" the peasant said as they came up to him. "Yes," Surajah replied. "We told you we should come back here, unless we got news of some tiger being marked down near one of the other villages. We have been as far as the edge of the jungle, and although we have heard of several, not one of them seems to be in the habit of coming back regularly to the same spot. So we thought we could not do better than return here at once and make it our headquarters. I see you have got some soldiers here." "Yes," the old man said discontentedly, "and a rough lot they are. They demand food, and instead of paying for it in money, their officer gives us bits of paper with some writing on them. He says that when they go we are to take them to him, and he will give us an equal to the whole of them, for which we can receive money from the treasury at Seringapatam. A nice thing that. None of us have ever been to Seringapatam, and should not know what to do when we got there. Moreover, there would be no saying whether one would ever come back again. It is terrible. Besides, we have only grain enough for ourselves, and shall have to send down to the plains to buy more, and where the money is to come from nobody can tell." "I think I could tell you how you had better proceed, if you will take us into your house," Surajah said. "This is not a place for talking. There are 4 or 5 soldiers there watching us." The old man entered the house and closed the door behind them. "How would you counsel us to proceed?" he asked, as soon as they had seated themselves on a divan, formed of a low bank of beaten earth, with a thick covering of straw. "It is simple enough," Surajah said. "One of you would take the order, on the sultan's treasury, to a large village down in the plain. You would go to a trader, and say that you wished to purchase so much grain and other goods, and would pay for them with an order on the sultan's treasury. It would probably be accepted as readily as cash, for the trader would send it to a merchant or banker at Seringapatam to get it cashed for him, to pay for goods he had obtained there, and either to send him any balance there might be, or to retain it for further purchases. An order of that kind is better than money for trading purposes, for there would be no fear of its being stolen on the way, as it could be hidden in the hair or shoe, or anywhere among the clothes of the messenger." "Wonderful!" the old peasant said. "Your words are a relief indeed to me, and will be to all the village when they hear them." "And now," Dick broke in, "let us talk about tigers. While you have been speaking, those soldiers have passed the door twice, and have been looking suspiciously at the house. If they take it into their heads to come here, and to ask who we are and what is our business, it would not do to tell them that we have been discussing the value of the orders on the sultan's treasury. Now, if our advice has been of any assistance to you in this matter, you, in turn, can render us aid in our business of killing tigers. We want you to find out for us when a tiger was last seen near the village, where its lair is supposed to be, and whether, according to its situation, we should have the best chance of killing it by digging a pitfall, on the path by which it usually comes from the jungle, or by getting a kid and tying it up to attract the tiger to a spot where we shall be stationed in a tree." "I will assuredly do that, and everyone here will be glad to assist when I tell them the advice I have received from you, and would indeed do so in any case, for it will be a blessing to the village if you can kill the tiger that so often carries off some of our sheep and goats." At this moment there was a loud knocking on the door. On the peasant opening it, a group of soldiers demanded to see the men who had entered. "We are here," Surajah said, coming forward. "What do you want?" "We want to know who you are, and where you come from." "Anyone in the village could have told you that," Surajah said. "We are shikaris, and have come here to destroy tigers. We are arranging with this old man to find us guides who can point out the tracks of the one which has, for some time, been preying on their animals." "Yes, and on our children," the old man put in, "for 3 of them were carried off from the street here within the last month." The soldiers looked doubtful, but one of them said, "This is for our officer to inquire about. The men are strangers to the village, and he will want to question them." "We are quite ready to be questioned," Surajah said. "Our host here will bear me out in what I say, and there are others in the village who will tell you that we have been arranging with them to kill tigers in this neighbourhood, though as yet we have not settled what they will pay us for each beast we destroy." Accompanied by the peasant, they went with the soldiers to the guard house, with which each of the frontier villages was provided. It consisted of a group of huts, surrounded by a thick wall of sunburnt bricks. They were taken into the largest hut, where the officer of the party was seated on a rough divan. "Who have you here?" he asked irritably, for he had been awakened from a doze by their entry. "They are 2 young fellows who are strangers here. They say they are shikaris, who have come into the village to gain a reward for killing a tiger that has been troublesome." "They were here 3 days ago, Sahib," the villager said, and asked us many questions about the tigers, and were, when the soldiers came to the door, questioning me as to the tiger's place of retreat, and whether a pitfall or a kid as a decoy would be most suitable. "Where do you come from?" the officer asked Surajah. "We live in a little village some distance down the ghauts. We heard that tigers were more abundant in the village country up here than they are below, and thought that we would, for a time, follow our calling here. We can get good prices for the skins down below, and with that, and what we get from the villages for freeing them from the tigers, we hope that in a few months to take back a good store of money." "Your story is a doubtful one," the officer said harshly. "You may be what you say, and you may be spies." "If we had been spies," Surajah said, "we should not be here, but at Bangalore or Seringapatam. These villages are not the places where news is to be gained." This was so self-evident that the officer had nothing to say against it. "At any rate," he said after a pause, "there is no confirmation to your story, and as I have orders to put all suspicious persons under arrest, I shall detain you." "It is very hard," Surajah began, but the officer made an impatient gesture, and while two of the soldiers put their hands on the shoulders of the prisoners and led them from the hut. "You need not look so downcast," one of the guards said good naturedly. "I don't suppose you will be kept here long, and will no doubt be released when the sultan has gone down the passes with his army. A week or two here will do you no harm. The tigers can wait for a bit. There, give us your weapons. I dare say you will get them back again when we go on, as I hope we shall do, for there is nothing to eat and nothing to do in this miserable place." The arms were taken into the officer's hut, and as there was a sentry at the gate, no further attention was paid to them. "I will get you some provisions and bring them in," the old man said. "It is hard indeed that men cannot go about their business without being interfered with." "Thank you, but we have enough for 2 or 3 days. When that is gone, we will give you some money to buy more, for we have a few rupees with us, as we knew it might be some time before we should be able to kill a tiger." As soon as the old man had left them, they seated themselves on a large faggot of wood that had been brought in by the villagers for fuel. "We cannot stay here, Surajah. It is most important that we should get back with the news, and I have no doubt that pig-headed brute in there will do as he says, and will hold us prisoners until Tippoo has gone down the passes. We must get off tonight, if possible. We are not likely to be looked after very sharply. I don't think that fellow really suspects us, but is simply keeping us to show his authority. There ought to be no difficulty in getting out. I suppose we shall be put into one of the soldiers' huts tonight, and if we crawl out when they are asleep, we have only to make our way up those narrow steps to the top of the wall, and then let ourselves down the other side. It is not above 15 feet high, and even if we dropped, we should not be likely to hurt ourselves." "There will most likely be a sentry at the gate," Surajah observed, "and there is a moon tonight. There ought to be no difficulty in pouncing on him suddenly, gagging him before he can give the alarm, and then tying him up. We will walk round and see if there is any rope lying about. If not, I will tear my sash into strips. We can use yours to lower ourselves over the wall. I should like to get our weapons if we could. The guns do not matter, but the pistols are good ones, and if there is an alarm given, we may have to fight. Besides, it is not impossible that we may come across a tiger as we go along. I vote that, when we have secured the sentry, we pay the officer a visit." Surajah nodded. He was quite ready to agree to anything that Dick might suggest, and felt a strong desire to repossess himself of his arms, for it seemed to him that it would be a humiliation to go back without them. "Of course," Dick went on, "if the sentry gives the alarm before we can secure him, we must give up part of our plan, for in that case we should have to bolt. Once over the wall, we should be all right. They may fire away at us as we run, but there is no fear of their hitting us, half asleep as they will be, and not quite sure what it is all about. If we get a fair start of them, we need not have much fear of their catching us." "Not as long as it is straight running, Sahib, but if they follow us far, they may come up within range of us, as we are making our way down some of those nasty places where we came up the face of the ghat. If we once get well away from them, we will hide up somewhere, and then strike off on another line." "Yeah, we might do that," Surajah agreed, "but, the place where we came up was the only one that seemed to us climbable, and it would be certainly better to make for it again, if we can find our way." "Oh, I quite agree with you there, Surajah. It would never do to go and find ourselves on the edge of a precipice that we could not get down, with the soldiers anywhere near us. Besides, it is of the greatest importance that we should take this news back as soon as possible, as every hour may be of importance. I only wish we could find out which pass Tippoo means to go by, but I don't suppose that will be known until he starts for it. Anyway, our news will be very valuable, for at present he is supposed to be over on the other side, and he would have taken our troops entirely by surprise if he had suddenly poured out into the plain. So we must give up my idea of hiding up, for if we did so, we should have to lie there all day, and it would mean the loss of 24 hours. For I would not go down those ghauts for any money except in daylight. It's a very different thing going downhill to going up. and if we were to attempt it in the dark we should break our necks for a certainty. If we can get away early tonight, we shall be at the edge of that steep place by 9 o'clock in the morning, and if we strike the right point, we might be back to the Rajah by nightfall." "It will be difficult to find our way back in the dark," Surajah said. "No doubt. Still, we can keep in the general direction, and even if we do not hit upon the stream tonight, we shall find it in the morning." It was late in the afternoon when they reached the village, and it was now growing dark. 2 soldiers came up to them and bade them follow them into one of the huts, and there pointed to the farther corner as their place. They wrapped themselves in their blankets and at once lay down. "If they take it into their heads," Dick whispered to Surajah, "to put a sentry on guard at the door, it will upset all our plans. It would not be very difficult to cut our way through the mud wall behind us, but in the first place they have taken away our knives, and even if we had them, it would be risky work trying it. The chances are that they will probably sit and talk all night. Of course, we might surprise the sentry, but it would be a great risk with those fellows close at hand, and we should have to run straight for the steps, and might get a dozen balls after us before we were over the wall." "Oh, I don't think there would be much chance of their hitting us," Surajah said. "Jumping up from their sleep in confusion, they would be a minute or so before they could find out what had happened, and we should be at the foot of the walls before they saw us, and then they would fire almost at random. But in that case we should lose our weapons," he added regretfully. "We cannot help that. The arms are no consequence at all, compared to our getting away, unless, of course, any of them happen to overtake us." For 3 or 4 hours the soldiers, of whom there were 10 in the hut, sat eating, talking, and smoking round the fire, which they kept burning on the earthen floor. One by one, however, they left it and lay down. When but 3 remained, one of them got up with a grumble of discontent, took his musket, which was leaning against the wall, and went out of the hut. "What a nuisance!" Dick whispered. "He is evidently going on sentry duty. Perhaps he has gone to the gate?" "I am afraid not. I expect the other hut is furnishing the sentry there. Listen." During the pauses of the low conversation of the 2 men still sitting by the fire, they could hear a footfall outside. "That settles the question," Dick said. "Now, the sooner those fellows go to sleep, the better." "We had better wait for some time after they do," Surajah replied. "1 or 2 of the men who lay down first are sure to get up and go to the door and look out. They always do that once or twice during the night. The sentry will soon get accustomed to the door being opened, and won't look round sharp." "That's a good idea," Dick agreed. "The moon is at the back of the hut, so we shall be in the shadow. I'll spring upon him, and will try and grip him by the throat, so that he can't hole out. You wrench the musket from his hands, and snatch his belt of cartridges. That will give us a weapon, anyhow. As soon as you have got it, I will give him one sharp squeeze and throw him down. It will be some time before he gets his breath enough to hold." In half an hour the 2 men by the fire lay down. It was not long before, as Surajah predicted, one of the sleepers sat up and stretched himself. Then he rose and walked to the door, opened it, and stood at the entrance. A moment later he was joined by another figure, and for a few minutes they stood talking together. Then he came in again, shut the door, and lay down. During the next hour 3 of the others followed his example, the last of them leaving the door ajar behind him when he came in. "Now is our chance, Surajah. We must give him 10 minutes to fall asleep again, then we will move. Should one of them be lying awake and notice us, which is not likely, for it is too dark in here to see figures distinctly, and ask where we are going, say, 'To the door to get cool.' They won't imagine that we are thinking of escape, with one sentry at the door and another at the gate. Don't you think, Sahib, that it would be safer to kill the sentries?" "Safer or not, Surajah, we will not do it. At present they have done us no harm. They are only acting as their officer ordered, and we have no grudge against them. When they take to shooting at us, we must shoot at them, but to kill this sentry would be nothing short of murder." After waiting a few minutes longer, Dick said, "We had better be off now. If we are to wait longer, we should have another fellow getting up." They rose quietly to their feet, made their way to the door, and opened it noiselessly. The sentry was standing leaning on his long matchlock a few feet away. Suddenly a voice behind exclaimed, "Who is that?" The sentry was in the act of turning round when Dick sprang upon him and grasped him by the throat. No cry came from the man's lips, but the gun fell from his grasp as he clutched convulsively at Dick's wrists, and went off as it fell. "Pick it up!" Dick shouted, "and run!" He released his grip from the man's throat, snatched the bandolier from his shoulder, and, tripping his feet from under him, threw him heavily to the ground, and then turned to run. The hold had occupied but a few seconds, but as he started, a soldier ran out from the hut, shouting loudly. He had a gun in his hand. Dick changed his mind, turned, threw himself upon him, wrenched the gun from his hold, and, as the man staggered back, struck him with his right hand under the chin. The man fell back through the open door as if shot. Dick seized the handle and closed it, and then ran at full speed toward the foot of the steps. They were but some 20 yards away. "Up you go, Surajah. We have not a moment to lose." Dick sprang up the steps, Surajah following. As they reached the top of the wall, a shot was discharged at them by the sentry at the gate, who, ignorant of the cause of the sudden uproar, had been standing in readiness to fire. He was, however, too excited to take aim, and the bullet flew harmlessly over their heads. In another instant they sprang over the parapet. "Lower yourselves by your arms, and then drop." The wall, like many others of its sort, was thicker at the base than on the top, and the foot projected 2 feet beyond the upper line, so that it was a sharp slide rather than an absolute fall. It was well that it was so, for although only some 12 feet inside, it was 8 feet higher on its outer side, as a dry ditch encircled it. Both came down in a heap on the sand that had crumbled from the face of the wall. As soon as they picked themselves up, Dick exclaimed, "Keep along the foot of the wall, Surajah," and they dashed along until they reached the angle. As they turned the corner, they heard a burst of voices from the wall where they had slid down, and several shots were fired. Dick led the way along the ditch to the next angle, then left it and entered the village, and dashed along the street. The sound of firing had roused many of the peasants. Doors were opened, and men coming out. Exclamations of surprise were heard, as the 2 figures rushed past, but no one thought of interfering with them. As they left the houses behind them, Surajah said, "You are going the wrong way, Sahib. You are going right away from the ghauts." "I know that well enough," Dick panted, "but I did it on purpose. We'll turn and work round again. They'll hear from the villagers that we have come this way, and will be following us down the road, while we are making our way back to the ghauts." They ran for another 100 yards, then quitted the path, and made across the fields. From the fort and the village they could hear a great hubbub, and above it could make out the voice of the officer, shouting orders. They continued to run for another quarter of a mile, and then they turned. "Now we can go quietly," Dick said, breaking into a walk. "This line will take us clear of the fort and the village, and we have only to make straight for the ghauts. I think we have thrown them well off the scent, and unless the officer suspects that we have only gone the other way to deceive him, and that we are really making for the ghauts, we shall hear nothing more of them." "It is capital," Surajah said. "I could not think what you were doing when you turned round the corner of the fort and made for the village, instead of going the other way. But where did you get that gun from?" Dick told him how it had come into his possession. "It is not so much that I cared for the gun," he said, "as that I wanted to prevent the man from using it. If he had followed me closely, he could hardly have helped hitting me, or one of us, at least, as we went up the steps. By shutting the door, we gained a few moments, for they were all in confusion in the dim light inside, and would certainly not learn anything, either from the man I pitched in among them, or from the sentry outside. I don't suppose any of them had an idea of what had happened, until the sentry shouted to them that we had got over the wall. Then they rushed up and fired at random from the top, thinking that we should be running straight from it. They walked along for a short distance, and then Dick said, 'I've got my wind again now. We'll go on to a jog trot. I mistrust that officer. He had a crafty face, and as we said we belonged to a village down the ghauts, he may have a suspicion that we have been trying to throw him off the scent, and think we should be sure to double back and make for home.' They kept on their way, sometimes dropping into a walk, but generally going at an easy trot until daybreak. As soon as it gets a little lighter, Surajah, we will go up on to one of those rises, so as to have a good look down over the line we have come. If they are following us, we must go on at the top of our speed. If we see nothing of them, we can take it quietly. Of course, they can't have been following our steps, but it's quite likely that some of the villagers may know that the ghauts can be climbed at the point where we came up. You know, we noticed signs of a path 2 or 3 times on the way up. In that case, if the officer really did think of pursuing us, he would take one of the villagers as a guide." Half an hour later, they ascended a sharp rise and threw themselves down on its crest. "I don't think there is the least chance of their coming," Surajah said, carelessly. "When they had gone some distance without overtaking us on the road, they may possibly have suspected that we had turned and made this way, but by the time they got back to the village, they would know well enough that there is no chance of overtaking us." Dick made no answer. He had a sort of uneasy conviction that the officer would at once suspect their plan, and that pursuit would have commenced very shortly after they had repassed the fort. For some minutes no words were spoken. No sign of life was to be seen, but in so broken a country, covered in many places with jungle or wood, a considerable body of men might be coming up unperceived. Suddenly Dick grasped Surajah's arm. "There they are. You see that I was right. Look at that clump of bush half a mile away, well to the left of the line we came by. They have just come out from there. There are 10 or 12 of them." "I see them," Surajah said. "They are running, too, but not very fast. We will crawl back till we are out of their sight, and then make a run for it. They must have got a guide, and are, no doubt, taking a more direct line than we are, for we may be a good bit off the stream we followed as we came along. I have not seen anything I recognize since it got light, though I am sure we are going somewhat near the right direction. Now, we have got to run for it." They dashed off at a rate of speed much higher than that which they had before been travelling, keeping as much as possible in ground covered from the sight of their pursuers, and bearing somewhat to the left, so as to place the latter directly behind them, and to strike the path Dick had no doubt their pursuers were keeping. "It's no use running too fast," he said a few minutes later. "There is a good long way to go yet, another 10 miles, I should think, and anyhow I don't think we can get down that steep place before they come to the edge of the cliff above. You see, we are not certain as to where it is. We might strike the cliffs a mile or two on either side of it, and I have no doubt that they will go straight to the spot. I expect the man they got as a guide has been in the habit of going down the ghauts, and knows his way. If it were not that we were in such a hurry to get to Uncle with the news about Tippoo, it would be much better to turn off altogether and stay in a wood for a day or two. They would not stop very long at the top of the ghauts, for they cannot be sure that we are going that way at all, and when a few hours passed and we didn't come, the officer would suppose that he was mistaken, and that we really kept on in the line on which we started." They trotted along for some time in silence, and then Surajah said, "Do you not think that it would be better for us to make for the pass to the left? It is 20 miles off, but we should be there by evening, and we should surely find some way of getting into it, below where the fort stands." Dick stopped running. "Why not go the other way, and make for the pass we know?" he said. "It can't be more than 15 miles at the outset, and once below the fort we know our way, and should get down to the village 12 hours sooner than if we went round by the other pass." "It would be the right plan if we could do it," Surajah agreed. "But you know the rocks rise straight up on both sides of the fort, and the road passes up through a narrow cleft, with the fort standing at its mouth. That's why I proposed the other pass." "I think we had better try it, nevertheless, Surajah. We should not be more than 3 hours in going straight there, and shall have ample time to follow the edge of the precipice for the last 5 miles. We may discover some break where we can get down. If we should find it impossible to descend anywhere, we must sleep till sunset, then strike the road above the fort, go down at night, and manage to slip past the sentry. The only thing is, Sahib, that it seems as if the fort lay right across the entrance to the gorge, and the road went through it." "It did look like that, Surajah. Certainly the road went through a gateway, but there must be a break somewhere. We could see that in the wet season a lot of water comes down there, so there must be some sort of passage for it, and if the passage is big enough for the storm water to go through, it must be big enough for us." Surajah agreed, and they turned off from the line that they had before been following, no longer hurrying, but walking at a leisurely pace. They were not pressed for time. There was no chance whatever of pursuit, and as they had been going for some 6 hours at the top of their speed, they were both feeling very exhausted. After proceeding for 2 miles, they came upon a small stream. Here they sat down, lighted a fire, mixed some flour and water, for although the ghee had been taken from them when they were disarmed, they had been allowed to retain their supply of flour for their sustenance in prison, and made some small cakes. These they cooked in the glowing embers. They could not be termed a success, for the outside was burnt black, while the centre was a pasty mass. However, they sufficed to satisfy their hunger, and after an hour's rest they again went forward. It was not very long before they stood on the edge of the rock wall. They followed this along, but could nowhere find a spot where a descent seemed at all possible. After walking for an hour, they saw a road winding up a long valley below them. "That's our road," Dick exclaimed. "That clump of houses, Surajah, must be the one where we generally turned. I know that from below these rocks looked as steep as walls, so there's no chance of our finding a way down anywhere between this and the fort." Surajah nodded. To him also the ascent of the ghauts had seemed impracticable. "It's no use following this line any more," Dick went on. "We may as well strike across until we come unto the edge of the pass, somewhere above the fort, and find a place where we can descend easily, and then lie down and sleep till it's time to make our attempt." In another hour they were looking down on the road a mile or so above the fort. The slopes here were gradual, and could be descended without the least difficulty, even in the dark. "There, do you see, Surajah? The watercourse runs along by the side of the road. There's a little water in it now. You know, we used to meet with it down below, and water our horses at a pool close to that ruined village. When we start, we can follow the road until we get close to the fort, and then crawl along in the watercourse and take our chances. If we should find it so blocked up that we can't get through, we must then see how we can get past the place in some other way. If the gate is only barred, no doubt we should be able to overpower the sentry, and get the gate open before any alarm is given. If it's locked, we must do the best we can. We may calculate upon taking the sentry by surprise, as we did in the prison, and on silencing him at once. Then we should have time to break up some cartridges and pour the powder into the keyhole, which is sure to be a big one, and make a slow match and blow the lock open. We could make the slow match before we start, if we had some water." "Shall I go down to the stream and get some?" "You have nothing to carry it up in, Surajah, and besides, someone might come along the valley." "We shall only want a little water. I will take off my sash and dip it in the stream. That will give us plenty when it is wrung out." "At any rate, Surajah, we will do nothing until it is getting dusk. See, there are some peasants with 3 bullocks coming down the valley, and there are 4 armed horsemen riding behind them. We will go back to those bushes 100 yards behind us, and sleep there until sunset. Then we will make our way down to that heap of boulders close to the stream, manufacture our slow match, and hide up there until it is time to start. We want a rest badly. We did not sleep last night, and if we get through, we must push on tonight without a stop. So we must have a good sleep now." The sun was low when they woke. They watched it dip below the hills, and then, after waiting until it began to get dusk, started for the valley. No one was to be seen on the road, and they ran rapidly down the slope until they reached the heap of boulders. Surajah tore off a strip of cotton 6 inches long by an inch wide from the bottom of his dress, and then went forward to the stream and wetted it. When he came back, they squeezed the moisture from it, broke up a cartridge, rubbed the powder into the cotton, and then rolled it up longwise. "That will be dry enough by the time we want to start. I hope we shan't have to use it, but if there is no other way, we must do so." They remained where they were until they thought that the garrison of the fort would be, for the most part, asleep. Then they crossed the stream and walked along by the side of the road, taking care not to show themselves upon it, as their figures would be seen for a long distance on its white, dusty surface. Presently the sides of the valley approached more closely to each other, and just where they narrowed they could make out a number of dark objects, which were, they doubted not, the houses occupied by the garrison. They at once took to the bed of the stream, stooping low as they went, so that their bodies would be indistinguishable among the rocks. They could hear the murmur of voices as they passed through the village. Once beyond it, they entered the gorge. Here there was but room enough for the road and the stream, whose bed was several feet below the causeway. A few hundred yards farther, the gorge widened out a bit, and in the moonlight they could see the wall of the fort stretching before them, and a square building standing close to it. "That is the guard house, no doubt," Dick said in low tones. "It is too close to be pleasant, and if we have to attack the sentry." Very carefully they picked their way among the rocks, until close to the wall. Then Dick gave a low exclamation of disappointment. The stream ran through a culvert some 12 feet wide and 10 feet high, but this was closed by iron bars, crossing each other at intervals of only 5 or 6 inches, the lower ends of the perpendicular bars being fixed in a stone dam extending across the bed of the stream. Dick waded across the pool formed by the dam and felt the bars, but found them particularly solid and strong. "It's no good, Surajah," he said when he returned. "There is no getting through there. There is nothing for it but the gate, unless we can find the steps up to the top of the wall and get up unnoticed. Then we might tear up our sashes longwise, knot them together, and slip down. The first thing to do is to have a look round. I'll get up close to the wall. It's in shadow there." Entering the pool again, he climbed up the steep bank, which was here faced with stones. He stopped when his eyes were above the level and looked round. There was the gate, 12 feet away, and to his delight no sentry was to be seen. He was about to whisper Surajah to join him, when he heard voices. They came from above, and he at once understood that, instead of a man being posted behind the gate, 2 were on guard on the wall above it. He beckoned to Surajah to join him, and when he did so whispered what he had discovered. "If the gate is only barred, we are all right now, Surajah, except that we shall have to run the risk of being shot by those fellows on the wall. We shall be a pretty easy mark, on that white road by moonlight. Our only plan will be to keep close to the wall. When we are through the gate, get down into the bed of the stream again, and then crawl along among the rocks. The bottom will be in shadow, and we may get off without being noticed. The only fear is that we shall make a noise in opening the gate. Now, let's try it." Keeping close to the wall, they crept to the gateway. This projected 2 feet beyond the gate itself, and standing against the latter they could not be seen, even in the unlikely event of one of the sentries looking down. The only risk was of anyone in the guardhouse coming out. This, however, could not be avoided, and they at once began to examine the fastenings of the gate, which consisted of 2 massive bars of wood running across it. These, by their united strength, they removed one after another, but when they tried it, they found the gate still immovable. "The beastly thing is locked," Dick said. "There's nothing to do but to blow it open." He broke off the ends of 3 cartridges, poured the powder in at the keyhole, and then inserted the slow match. "Stand in the corner there, Surajah. I will go down to the stream again, to light the tinder. The noise is less likely to be heard there." He stole back again, sat down at the edge of the water, placed his tinder box in his lap, took his turban off and put it over his hands, so as to deaden the sound, and then struck the steel sharply against the flint. The first blow was successful. The spark fell on the tinder, and at once began to extend. He listened intently. The men on the walls were still talking, and the sound had evidently not reached their ears.